Welcome to Life Stories, where we share raw and real accounts of life's ups and downs. Today, we bring you a story about David Mitchell, a successful businessman who thought he had everything, but still felt alone. After years of giving everything to his family, he reaches a breaking point, realizing the true cost of sacrifice. This journey is about betrayal, tough decisions, and ultimately, rediscovering the value of family, empathy, and self-worth. Stay tuned as we dive into David's emotional transformation. Please subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. My name is David Mitchell, and I'm 40 now. I guess you could say I've done all right for myself. I built a real estate business from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous at the beginning. It was just me, a beat-up laptop, and countless sleepless nights. No wife, no kids, though that's fine by me. The work, the hustle, kept me going. I had everything I needed. Or at least, I thought I did. I had family, too. My parents, of course. Still living in that small bungalow they'd worked their whole lives to pay off. And then there was Chris, my younger brother. He was always the one who needed help. But I didn't mind. I'd given him his first house. A nice place with a big backyard. His wife Rachel, always kind, but maybe a little too sarcastic for my taste. They had 2 kids, Ella and Ben, and I was their provider. The big brother who made sure everything was taken care of. I worked hard, really hard, so they wouldn't have to. Gave them houses, cars, money every month. It felt good to be the hero in my own family story. That night, in late summer, was supposed to be a celebration, a party for the family at one of the houses I'd bought. I'd spared no expense, catered food, fancy drinks, the works. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping a cold beer, watching everyone eat, laugh, and chat. My parents were in the living room, Mom slicing cake while Dad told one of his old stories. The kids were running around with sticky hands, and Chris and Rachel were sitting on the couch, her feet resting on his lap. The scene was perfect, messy, chaotic, but perfect. My chest swelled with pride. This was what I worked for, I thought, to see them happy. But then, Rachel, after a few glasses of wine, her cheeks flushed and her voice louder than usual, opened her mouth. "You're not man enough, David," she said with a smirk, looking right at me. "No kids, no wife. You're just a walking ATM." The room went quiet for just a second. And then, just as quickly, a wave of laughter erupted. Chris laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Mom and Dad chuckled too, almost like they just heard the best joke. Even Ella and Ben giggled, though they probably didn't understand it at all. I stood there, beer halfway to my mouth, my face burning. I couldn't believe it. My own family, laughing at me, mocking me. I felt like I was suffocating in that moment, surrounded by smiles that weren't for me but at me. I forced a smile, that fake one you slap on when you're dying inside. "Yeah, real funny," I muttered quietly. I set my beer down, grabbed my keys from the counter, and walked out. No shouting, no big scene, just the sound of my boots on the hardwood floor and then the slamming of the screen door behind me. Their laughter followed me all the way to my car, a black pickup I'd bought with cash. I sat there in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced. I saw myself at 20, working construction to pay the bills after Dad lost his job. I remembered handing Chris the keys to his first house, grinning like a fool. I thought about all those late nights, the holidays I'd skipped, the dates I'd canceled, all so they could have what I never did, so they wouldn't have to struggle the way I had. And yet, they laughed at me, called me an ATM like I was nothing more than a wallet with legs. My hands tightened on the wheel, my knuckles turning white. I could still hear Rachel's voice, sharp and cruel, echoing in my mind. Something snapped inside me, not loud, not dramatic, but a quiet break. I was done. Done being their punching bag. Done being the fool who paid for their lives while they mocked mine. I started the engine, the hum of the truck drowning out the crickets that had been chirping outside. My phone buzzed, probably Chris calling. clueless as always. But I didn't look at it. I just stared out the windshield at the big house glowing in the dark. A house full of people who didn't deserve me. I could still hear their laughter in the back of my mind. But this time, it felt different. They were laughing on the wrong side of their mouths. I thought. I hit the gas, peeled out of the driveway, and didn't look back. The road blurred past me, the streetlights streaking by in the darkness. I didn't go far, just to my place, a big, empty house that had never felt like a home. It felt more like a showroom. Cold and sterile. I pulled into the garage, sat there with the engine running, my hands still on the wheel, and I didn't move. My phone buzzed again. Chris, Mom. But I didn't care. I didn't want to talk to any of them. Not right then. I sat there, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The laughter still echoed in my head. I didn't need them, I told myself. Not anymore. And yet, as I sat in that empty house, I realized I was more alone than I had ever been. The next morning came quickly. I barely slept, my mind spinning all night, trying to make sense of what I had done. But when the sun rose, I knew what needed to be done. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the decision I'd made. But I could make sure they felt the consequences. I grabbed my phone, still buzzing from the missed calls, and dialed Pete, my accountant. His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up. But I didn't care. I had no patience left. Pete, I need you to cut them off. All of them, I said flatly. Freeze their accounts. Cancel their cards. No more money. He paused, chewing his gum. You sure about this, David? That's a lot of cash, 50 grand a month. You want me to do all of it? Yeah, everything, I replied, my voice unwavering. And get their houses listed. I want the bungalow, Chris's place, and that condo gone by Friday. Don't ask questions. Just do it. There was another pause on the other end. I could hear Pete moving papers around. Maybe setting up his notes. All right, I'll handle it. I hung up, my hands tight around the phone. But my gut felt like it was falling out of my stomach. My head was clear, but my heart was heavy. I sat down at the kitchen counter, staring at nothing. It was done. I couldn't take it back now. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to the office, clicked through contracts and emails, trying to stay busy. The calls from Chris, then Mom, kept piling up. I didn't return them. I couldn't. Not yet. By noon, Pete had texted me. He'd done it. The accounts were locked, and the properties were on the market. The realtor was already working on listing Chris's house. I drove over to Chris's place in the late afternoon. His house, the one I'd paid for, the one I'd given him for his family, now had a "for sale" sign planted in the front yard. The realtor was snapping pictures of the property. I barely recognized it. The life I had built for him, the memories I'd helped create, were now just an asset to be sold off. I drove by slowly, watching Chris's face as he walked out onto the porch, a look of confusion and anger crossing his features. But I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I didn't even look at him. It felt cold, empty. I could still hear Rachel's words echoing in my head. You're just a walking ATM. She had no idea how much I had sacrificed. Next, I drove to the bungalow, the home where I grew up, the one I had rebuilt with my own hands after Dad lost his job. The realtor was there, putting up another "for sale" sign. I pulled into the driveway and saw Mom, walking out the front door, looking lost and small. Jimmy, she called out, her voice breaking. But I didn't answer. I just nodded at her through the windshield and pulled away. And then, there was the condo. It had always been a quiet place for me. One I kept after Rachel's mother died. I'd kept it ready for any occasion. I drove there too, watching the "for sale" sign go up as I approached. By the time the sun dipped low, every property I had worked for, every home I had given them, was on the market. They had no idea what was coming. Back at my office, I sat down in front of my desk and poured a drink, cheap whiskey. But it burned just right. My phone buzzed again. Chris's voice was tight and frantic, asking why the cards weren't working, why everything had been frozen. Mom's voice left a voicemail. Softer now. Apologetic. But I didn't listen. I didn't want to hear their excuses. It felt like a victory. But the emptiness inside me grew. I had given them everything. And they laughed. They mocked me when I needed them to understand. Now, I was alone. I had what I wanted. But somehow, it didn't feel like enough. The silence in my office was deafening. Days passed, and the consequences of my actions began to sink in. The calls and messages from my family kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. But I ignored them. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. The houses were sold, the money was gone, my family was scattered, and there was no going back. But then something unexpected happened. It wasn't just the silence of my office or the empty house I lived in. It was the question that kept echoing in my mind. Was I really doing the right thing? That question didn't come from anyone in my family. No, it came from someone I'd met a while ago. A woman named Olivia. I met her at a charity event a few months before everything started to fall apart. She ran a small nonprofit for underprivileged children. Her eyes were sharp, her demeanor calm but confident. At first, I thought she was just another person trying to sell me something. But as the conversation unfolded, I realized she wasn't pitching me anything. She wasn't asking for a donation or a partnership. She just had one question for me. You've got all this power, David, she said, her voice steady. All this money, what's it for, if you're standing here alone? Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting anyone to ask me that. Especially not her. She didn't judge me. She didn't lecture me. She just asked a simple question. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have an answer. It stayed with me for days. I went over it again and again in my mind. What was all of this for? The money, the houses, the success? What had I really built if I was alone? Olivia's words haunted me because, deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent so much of my life building things for other people. Things that would never truly be mine, while sacrificing my own happiness. My own family. A week later, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I went to see Olivia. Her nonprofit was housed in a small, rundown building on a quiet street. The sign was peeling, but inside, the place was full of life. Kids were reading, laughing, playing. It was messy, but in the best way possible. There was a warmth there that I hadn't felt in a long time. Olivia noticed me right away when I walked in. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She handed me a coffee. And we sat together, quietly at first. Then, I finally spoke up. How do you keep going? I asked her, my voice rough. How do you do this every day? For them? She smiled. A small, knowing smile. Because they're worth it, she said simply. Somebody's got to show up for them. If I don't, who will? I couldn't speak for a moment. Her words stirred something deep inside me. It was a simple answer. But it felt profound. It was about showing up. For the people who needed you. Not because it was easy. But because it was the right thing to do. I thought about my own family. They needed me, or at least, I used to think they did. But now, it felt like I had built everything for the wrong reasons. I'd been showing up for them. Yes, but not for me. And I was tired. But I wasn't ready to let it all go yet. I wasn't ready to walk away from my family completely. I still had a connection with them. Even if it was broken. That afternoon, I made a decision. I'd start small. I wouldn't fix everything at once. But I could start with Ella and Ben. My niece and nephew. They hadn't laughed at me. They hadn't been part of the mocking. The hurtful jokes. They were innocent, caught in the middle of everything. I went home, grabbed my keys, and drove to their new place. It wasn't much, a small duplex in a neighborhood I wouldn't have chosen for them. But it was where they were now. I knocked on the door. And when Chris answered, his face was a mixture of guilt and pride. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the kids. They needed to know I hadn't abandoned them. That I still cared. I'll help, I said quietly. With their school fees, their basics. But that's it. No more. Chris nodded, looking both relieved and defeated. He didn't argue, and that was enough for me. I wasn't going to help Rachel. Not yet. She still had to own what she had done. But Ella and Ben were different. They needed me. It felt like the first real step towards something better. Towards healing. Maybe I wasn't ready to fix everything. But at least I was showing up for them. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel quite so alone. As the days went on, I started to realize something profound. Showing up for others, for the right reasons, wasn't about making big gestures. It was about small, consistent actions. I didn't need to rebuild my entire life in one go. But taking that first step to reconnect with Ella and Ben felt like the beginning of something new. It wasn't about money or properties anymore, it was about presence. About being there for the people who mattered. Even when it seemed like everything else had fallen apart. I kept my distance from Chris and Rachel, allowing them time to understand the weight of their actions. But for the kids, I made sure they felt supported. They needed that stability in the chaos. And in helping them, I realized that maybe I was starting to help myself too. One night, I found myself sitting in my small house. The one that no longer felt so empty. The silence wasn't painful anymore. I had peace. Not because I had everything I thought I wanted, but because I had finally started living for myself. Something I had forgotten in all the years of trying to fix everyone else's life. Maybe that's the lesson we all need to learn at some point. Life isn't just about building things for other people. It's about showing up, for them and for ourselves. It's about finding the balance. The connection that makes everything worth it. If you've enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Your support means a lot. And it helps us keep sharing these life stories. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one.